Let me perhaps, let's just see, I think we've got to probably move straight on because Tommy Johansson, our next speaker, who's the chief executive of AMRA. AMRA needs to catch a plane in very short order. So to prevent him from being trapped in London for another night, let's move right on. I want to emphasize how important AMRA has been as a collaborator in delivering outcomes from this resource. Tommy.
Thank you, Paul. So AMRA is a Swedish company, and we have developed a technology to automatically do segmentation and quantification of different fat compartments in the body, and also to quantify muscle volumes, so to describe your body composition. And we have applied that technology on the first 6,000 participants in the UK Biobank, and I will present the results. But what we can see at the fat distribution in your body tells a lot about your disease risk. So let's see. Overweight and obesity is defined by BMI today, and BMI is calculated by taking your weight divided by height square. And I have included my own numbers, so you can see that I'm borderline normal, under 25. If you are above 25, up to 30, you're overweight, and above 30 are obese. You can also use a waist circumference to describe risk, and you can see if you're a male above 94 centimeter, you are at higher risk. I will come back to these numbers. If we look at the prevalence of obesity among adults in the US, it's quite scaring. So it has gone from 10% in the 60s to 37% today, and it's predicted to increase a lot. If we instead look at the number of people with overweight, we see in the top US that 75%, or 3 out of 4 people, are overweight or obese. But we can also see that England is not far behind at 70%, and we see the same trend around the world, really. So in the UK Biobank, AMRA's technology is used to collect MRI images in 6 minutes, and we are investing heavily to do quantification of the liver fat percentage, visceral fat volume, the abdominal subcutaneous fat, which you see in blue, also the lean thigh muscle volume, and the muscle fat infiltration. To better understand the fat distribution in the body, we have developed this STAR concept. We call it BCP, Body Composition Profile, where we look at the fat distribution. So we are quantifying visceral fat, since other studies have shown that it's very well connected to insulin resistance, a good predictor of cardiovascular events. We look at liver fat, which also is connected to insulin resistance. It's a debated predictor of cardiovascular events, but also believed to be well connected to liver disease, NASH, and other diseases. We look at muscle fat infiltration, which has proven to be connected to sarcopenia and muscle degeneration. It's also a predictor of cardiovascular events and has proven to be a predictor of high mortality. We look at the total abdominal fat divided by height square. So it's a sort of BMI, but fat tissue specific. We look at the lean muscle tissue volume, which is connected to sarcopenia and cachexia. And loss of muscle is also a predictor in most end-stage diseases. And finally, we look at fat ratio, the relation between fat and muscle, so it's sort of a fitness level. And the star in the middle, that's really the healthy ideal profile. And it has proven that people that look like this are metabolic disease-free. We'll come back to that. So I will present results from a study that was published in Obesity in May by Linge et al. And here we have selected 7 identical men from the UK Biobank, all of them with BMI 27 and with the same waist circumference of 91. So they're extremely identical. But you can see that the amount of visceral fat goes from 2.4 liter to 9.3 liter. See if I have a pointer here. All the same BMI and the same waist circumference. And if we look at their profiles, you can also see that it looks very different. In the bottom, we see the visceral fat increasing. On the top right corner, we have the liver fat, and to the left, the muscle fat. That's the most interesting numbers. And what we try to understand, what does it mean if you have this profile with only extended visceral fat? Or if you have this one with extended visceral fat and liver fat, but okay with muscle fat. And to do this, we can use number 7 here as an example. So for all these 6,021 people, we have done the BCP and done all the measurements. And we have also compared these subjects with their disease history. And we have been focusing on the history of coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and the ones that are metabolic disease-free. So approximately 30% of the 6,000 seems to be metabolic disease-free. And then we use a multivariable statistic modeling to calculate the probability that the person with this profile already has type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease history, or is metabolic disease-free. And that we have done for all people. And if we look back to the 7 with the same BMI and waist circumference, we see a very different risk profile, although that they are very identical, but not on the inside. They have different fat distribution. And if we drill into that a little bit more, you can see that the first one is almost like the star shape, high association to being metabolic disease-free, low risk for coronary heart disease and diabetes. While this one with elevated visceral fat has a much higher risk for coronary heart disease. If we continue, if we have even more visceral fat, the risk increases a lot. If you add on liver fat with high visceral fat, you get much higher risk for diabetes. And finally, number 7 here, it's the comorbidity type with too much of everything. And you can see it's a very low chance that this person is disease-free, and maybe 6 times high risk for diabetes, only depending on fat distribution. So fat distribution matters. So to summarize our findings, we see that a low amount of visceral fat and muscle fat is very much associated to being metabolic disease-free. But a high amount of visceral fat and muscle fat is connected to both high association to coronary heart disease and type 2 diabetes. When we look at liver fat, we got a different message. So a high amount of liver fat together with a high amount of visceral fat increases your diabetes risk. But if you have a high amount of visceral fat and a low amount of liver fat, the coronary heart disease association or risk increase, which is a bit strange. And we don't see any significance with liver fat connected to being healthy. We also have tried to do the same, just using sex, age, lifestyle, BMI, and using single measurements, and we can't find the same associations. So it has proven to be very valuable to understand the fat distribution in the body. And a skewness in the fat distribution seems to increase the risk quite a lot for different diseases. So far, we have only been able to look at the historic disease data. With the increased number of participants, we can drill down into more rare diseases, compare different ethnic groups, look into socio-demographics. But what we're really looking forward to is to get the outcomes from the healthcare records, because then we can start to really look at disease prediction to see whether we can predict disease. And as an example, our vision is really that today you almost need to get a heart attack and then you get treated. But if we could find 3% with the highest risk to get the heart attack, we maybe can start to treat them before they get the disease, which will help the individual and the society, of course, a lot. Finally, I would like to thank our collaborators, the Linköping University team, University of Westminster, of course, the staff and participants of the UK Biobank, and Pfizer, which also have helped to fund this study. Thank you very much.
As Tommy has to rush off, and I know that there'll be a lot of interest in his presentation, let's just take 2 or 3 minutes if there are 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question for Tommy before he rushes off? Andrew's coming in with the microphone. One down from Ewan.
As well as these values, can we get at the raw data eventually as well of that 6-minute MRI scan?
Yeah, so we have already reported back the individual measurements of these 5 different measurements. So they are available for the first 6,000. Yeah.
So what about the raw data? What about the MRI scan itself?
It's not reported back today, just... of course, the images are available, and we report back the numbers, yeah.
Another question.
Yeah, the images are available through Biobank as with the other images. Yeah.
Is there another question?
Yeah, Tommy, so the liver fat association with CHD being lower, you said was unusual. I suspect it's probably because once you have CHD, there's an obesity paradox. You tend to be losing weight. So I suspect that's partly the explanation. So what we need is serial data to try and unpick some of these things as well. So.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, so I can't answer the details. But I know we also have been looking at the statins, which could be also an effect. But we can't see any connection to that.
No, there's plenty of published data that liver function levels, so markers of liver fat, decline once you get a certain age, and with chronic disease, they start to go down again. So okay. I suspect that's part of the explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe 1 more question, and then we'll have to stop. But if there are other questions, perhaps they could be directed to Jimmy Bell after the end of these sessions.
Hi there. Thanks for a good talk. What can you say about why fat is distributed so differently in different people?
I'm not really the right person, but what we can see in general all the time that you can never see on the outside or use BMI or waist circumference to understand how fat is distributed. So the 7 examples we saw here is not unusual. We can really pick any 7 people in the UK Biobank, and it's a very different picture of fat distribution in the body.
Okay. Let's give Tommy another round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Safe journey.
So I need to rush home to celebrate Midsummer, which is the biggest event in Sweden. Thank you.
I can tell it's going to be a late night.